Today, we're diving into a military paradox that, on the surface, makes absolutely no sense. It's a life-or-death decision made thousands of feet in the air that seems to go against all common logic. So let's get right into it.
So here's the central question. You've got a plane with two perfectly good doors, but paratroopers are only using one. Now, in a combat situation, getting troops on the ground fast is everything, right? So why on earth would you deliberately cut your exit speed in half? It seems totally illogical. But the reason isn't about being inefficient, it's about a fatal flaw in the physics of the jump itself.
And here's the most surprising part of this whole thing. The military actually used to do it the way that seems logical. Yeah, up until 1979, the official procedure was to use both doors at the same time. The whole doctrine was built around speed and efficiency. Get as many soldiers out of the plane and onto the drop zone as fast as humanly possible. That was the standard, accepted way of doing things.
But then reality and physics intervened in the worst way. This is what was happening. When two troopers jump at the exact same moment from opposite doors, the plane's incredible forward momentum and the airflow around it creates this kind of vacuum effect. It's like an invisible funnel, pulling them directly toward each other just as their canopies open. Their lines would get all tangled up, and with no way to steer apart, a mid-air collision became basically inevitable.
And we're not talking about these collisions happening close to the ground. No. They were happening after falling from over 10,000 feet. That's nearly 2 miles up in the air. At that kind of altitude, when your parachute is tangled with another soldier's, the situation is completely unrecoverable. There's just nothing to be done. The outcome is, tragically, a sure thing.
And this wasn't just some theoretical risk. It wasn't a one-time accident. This procedure cost 7 lives. 7 paratroopers died in these mid-air collisions before the practice was finally changed. Each one of those deaths was a tragic failure of a system that, on paper, seemed perfectly logical. This represents the very real human cost of that flawed logic.
The response to this tragedy was thankfully swift and decisive. Faced with such undeniable evidence, the military didn't just revise the two-door method, they'd banned it permanently. It was completely eliminated from doctrine. The safety of the paratroopers finally and rightfully took precedence over the perceived speed of deployment.
This timeline really just lays it all out, nice and clear. Before 1979, the rule was based on a theory of efficiency. But after 1979, the new rule was forged from tragic experience. It marks a really critical evolution in military procedure, a move away from a flawed theory to a harsh, but ultimately life-saving reality.
And this brings us to a final, much bigger question. When you see a single-file line or a procedure that seems maybe a little slow or inefficient, it's worth asking why it's done that way. From emergency exits on airplanes to protocols in an operating room, so many of the safety rules we now take for granted exist only because a tragedy proved that a different way was unsafe. It's a really sobering thought that our safety is so often built upon the lessons learned from the misfortunes of others.